All right, continuing our study of Genesis. I guess we're about a little over 2/3 of the way through, although it feels like we're fast approaching the home stretch. There's about 50 chapters in Genesis. We're going to pick up in about the middle of chapter 37 today. When we left off last time, we had the brothers of Joseph were left up or had wandered into Shechem. And we all remember what most recently happened in Shechem. Was Shechem a good place or a bad place?
Bad.
Yeah, Shechem was a bad place. We got to backtrack a little bit to pick up and lay the foundation for where we're going this week. Last week we talked about several things that were significant. We talked about some, in these chapters, how there are a number of burials that are referenced. And in fact, I found 5, and I think they're all significant, and I think there's some symbolism, something to be learned by these various burials. We covered 4 of them last time. We're going to cover the 5th one today. The other thing we talked about, sort of as a background, was how Jacob, whose name was changed to Israel as we know, had bestowed upon his favorite son Joseph this coat of many colors. And we talked about the significance of that and what that could represent. I think we see in this week's lesson what we're going to see starting in verse 12 and reading to the end of chapter 37. We really do see the symbolism of the coat of many colors, I believe, and what it represents. And I hope it becomes as clear to you as it did to me. But one of the things that we really have to struggle with, or I struggle with as I study through these sometimes very strange stories in the book of Genesis, is what they represent. What sort of symbolism do we have in these? And I always have to go back to the words of Jesus where he spoke, and he said several times in several different ways that all of the scriptures speak of him, and that Christ is revealed in all of the scriptures. And I think these Old Testament scriptures, some are easier than others to discern the revelation of Christ. But one of the things that we see particularly in the life of Joseph is that there is a foreshadowing of Christ. I think he is a type of Christ. One of the difficult things I think that I find in fitting together all the puzzle pieces is that some of what we see in Joseph is a foreshadowing of Christ's first coming, and we can see that. But some of the life of Joseph, I believe, relates to the second coming of Christ. And I want you to think about that as we read through. But we're going to see something very clear in the next few verses we read that relate to the first coming of Christ. And so let's pick up in verse 13. We're in chapter 37. And leading up to this, of course, we had the circumstance where Jacob gives this vari-colored tunic, it's called sometimes, or his coat of many colors, or his full-length tunic, to his favorite son, Joseph. And then Joseph had a couple of dreams which he revealed to his brothers. And what was the reaction of the brothers and even his father to the dreams?
Not very good.
Not very good. They thought he was either a nut or braggadocious or what. I mean, even his own father said, are you saying in your dream that you expect even your mother and I and your brothers to bow down to you? That's, that seems rather arrogant, young man. But anyway, what was Joseph doing? Joseph, I don't think, was trying to be braggadocious. I think Joseph had actually received a dream, a vision from the Lord, and he was doing nothing except telling others what he had heard from the Lord. Others didn't receive it too well. And we see a lot of symbolism there in what happened in Israel, throughout Israel, when God's prophets revealed the word of God to the people. What happened very often? They didn't believe him, number one. They were ridiculed, and many of them were killed. Jesus himself said, "O Jerusalem that slays the prophets, if only you had known. If only you had known that it was God that was speaking." So let's think about these verses that we're going to read and how they foreshadow Christ, how they portray Christ, and what message we have in these. Starting in verse 13. Let's start down there with Tommy. You want to start reading?
Yeah. A few days later, Israel called for Joseph and told him, "Your brothers are over in Shechem grazing the flock. Go and see how they are getting along, and how it is with the flock, and bring me word. Very good, Joseph replied. So he traveled for his home in the valley.
All right, pause right there. So what's going on right here? The boys have gone off. Joseph is with his father, Jacob or Israel, and Israel says, I want you to go check on your brothers. So the mission that Jacob, the father, gives to his son is, he says, go check on your brothers and bring me back a report. Okay, read on, Tommy.
A man noticed him wandering in the fields. Who are you looking for? He asked. For the brothers and their flock, Joseph replied. Have you seen them? Yes, the man told him. They are no longer here. I heard your brothers say they're going to Dothan. So Joseph followed them to Dothan and found them there. But when they saw him coming, recognizing him in the distance, they decided to kill him. Here comes that master dreamer, they exclaimed. Come on, let's kill him and toss him into the well and tell Father that a wild animal is eating him. Then we'll see what will become of all of his dreams.
All right, pause right there. So Joseph is successful in locating his brothers, and his brothers see him from a distance. How do you think they recognize him from a distance? Yeah, and that no doubt enrages them all the more. You know, our father's favorite, he gets the best coat, and here he is coming after us. What's he going to do to us this time? They say, here comes the dreamer. And it's interesting that we have the beginning of the plot revealed, although the exact brother or brothers who is or are behind the plot are not specifically revealed right now. We're going to see that some of the brothers are more in favor of it, some are less in favor of it. Okay, but it just says the brothers are talking among themselves, and they hatch this plot that they're going to kill their brother, whom their father has sent to them. All right, first.
I bet it was the older brother.
You think it was the older one? Well, we're going to see that old Reuben, the oldest brother, he's got a little bit of sympathy. He's, none of them say, "Oh no, let's save him." You know, we can't do that. They're all thinking about now. You know, what kind of a variation on this theme can I bring up?
You know, that had to be some true anger to think about killing your own brother. True anger.
True anger.
Jealousy.
Jealousy.
Jealousy, yeah.
And it goes all the way back
Jealousy.
to Cain and Abel.
Yeah,
Mhm.
it does.
Yeah.
Just last week, Quint brought home a worksheet.
I tell
Same
you,
thing, it had the picture of Joseph with the coat and all the brothers standing around him and they were sad. He says, Mommy, why are all the men so sad? He said, because they didn't get a new coat. Well, that's not right.
Be fair.
He's getting there.
Yeah, but but the question you raised, Warren, is a very good one. What would engender so much anger among his very brothers, his own blood, that would incite them to want to kill this brother? Jealousy?
I
Sure.
tell you one thing. If you want to see what a true family is, wait till your parents die, and then everybody starts dividing up the property.
Oh yeah.
And you're gonna really find out
Vultures.
We've been there.
Oh,
what
yeah.
some people had way down in their heart and soul.
Yeah, there's two class of people, those who've been through that and those who are going to go through that.
That's right.
Sad
That's
part
right.
is they remind me of vultures.
Yeah, oh, it's
Ready for the
a
kill.
sad thing, but you know, I don't know of anybody who's immune from it. And I've seen that. I don't do a whole lot of succession work in my practice, but in the successions I've been involved in, I've seen many fights, many ugly fights, many
You know
divisive
what?
things.
I had to, and to me, before you pass, you need to get that straightened out so that you can ease that. You can't take care of all of it. You can take care of a baby
Yeah.
portion as a parent before you
Yeah.
pass on.
Yeah, but you know, one of the things, and it sort of relates to this too. In fact, it's kind of at the heart of this. Is one of the things that causes so much
Got ready to hear this, these beatings.
anger and problems among the survivors is when a parent has favored one child
That's
over
right,
another.
that's when it
You know?
gets that there. And as you see if that parent have given more or,
Yeah.
and
Promise
then the less thought of gets let up,
Yeah.
it gets less. then that really puts the
Oh,
kick
yeah.
into
Look,
it.
I did a will one time, maybe been one of the last wills that I did. A lady came in and she said, I want to redo my will. And this is what I want to do. I want to give extra to one of my children. She had 4 children and she wanted to give extra one of them. I said, now, I said, how do you think that's going to make the others feel? She said, I don't care. I said, does it bother you that the other 3 may become angry to the point of just losing the relationship with that one? I don't care. It's my money. I'm going to do with it what I want to do. So she did, and she died. And when it was divided up, guess what?
World War III.
Yeah.
We see that right now.
Yeah, and frankly, I don't understand why parents do that, if for no other reason, do it because if the children are treated, if the children perceive that the parents treat them unequally, they're not going to get along. It's going to cause a real problem. I don't know the answer to it. It's as somebody said, it's been there since the very beginning, hasn't it? And it'll be there till the very end. Okay. Verse 21, who's our next reader? Talk about this old Reuben. Reuben is the firstborn. Let's see what his perspective on this is.
And Reuben heard it, and he delivered him out of their hands and said, let us not kill him. And Reuben said unto them, shed no blood, but cast him into this pit that is in the wilderness, and lay no hand upon him, that he might rid him out of their hands to deliver him to his father again.
Pause right there. So we see old Reuben, Reuben actually, he's the one who had the most to lose, right? Because he was the firstborn. He should have had gotten the birthright. He should have gotten the double portion. But when the brothers say, let's kill this guy, what does Reuben say? No, let's just throw him in the pit. And it says Reuben's idea was that he'd circle back later on and get him out of the pit and take him back to his father. So even though we already know that Reuben is something of a scoundrel, having slept with one of the wives of his father, nevertheless, he comes out looking not so bad here. Okay, so what do we have here next? Verse 23. Joanne, you want to read that?
And it came to pass, when Joseph was come unto his brother, that to strip Joseph out of his coat of many colors that was on him. And they took him and cast him into the pit, and the pit was empty, there was no water in it. And they sat down to eat bread, and they lifted up their eyes and looked, and behold, a company of Israelites came from Gilead, and with their camels bearing spicery and balm and myrrh, going to carry it down to Egypt. And Judah said unto his brothers...
Pause right there just a second. All right, so here we have, interestingly, the appearance of the Ishmaelites. And who are the Ishmaelites? First off, who is Ishmael? Anybody remember?
Yeah, Ishmael was the brother to the firstborn from Sarah and Abraham.
That's right. No, he was the firstborn of Abraham, but he was the offspring of Abraham and who?
Oh, yeah.
And Hagar.
Hagar, yeah.
Hagar, who was of what lineage?
Egyptian.
She was Egyptian, all right, and so there's a connection there, all right. So these are Ishmaelites. Ishmael, of course, would have been half Egyptian, going to his mother's side. Okay, so it is no coincidence that it is the Ishmaelites who are coming along to carry this child of promise, if you will, this son of Jacob, back where? Back to Egypt. Now, how is it that Hagar came onto the scene at all? It is said that Hagar was the Egyptian maid of Sarah. How'd they pick her up?
When they went down to Egypt the first time.
Yeah, and they had no business going down to Egypt. God didn't want them. God said to Abraham, go to the promised land, the land of Canaan, and stay there. But he sojourned, he took a little side trip. He went off, and one of the things he picked up on his trip down to Egypt was this maid for his wife Sarah, who was the beginning of Ishmael, which was the beginning of big problems for the children of Israel. And as we see, they were problems for a long time. Okay, so then Judah comes up, verse 26. Somebody read about Judah.
Oh, I'm sorry, yeah. Judah said to his brothers, "What will we gain if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites and lay our hands on him, and not lay our hands on him. After all, he is our brother, our own flesh and blood."
Paul's right there. Oh, Judah turns out to be really magnanimous, doesn't he? He says, all right, all the brothers think, what are we going to do with this guy? Well, the general consensus is, let's kill him, right? Reuben says, no, let's just throw him in the pit, all right? And Reuben's idea is he's going to circle back and rescue him. But Judah comes along and says, if we kill him, we're not going to make any money. We have a real opportunity to make some cash here because we see these Ishmaelites who are coming along. So, just to show how good we are, he says, let's not kill him, let's sell him. And so we don't.
We're talking cash flow.
That's right, exactly. Cash flow, the root of much evil. Okay,
So, let's see.
verse 28.
Yeah, let's see, 28. So when the Mennonite merchants came by, his brothers pulled Joseph up out of the cistern and sold him for 20 shekels of silver to the Ishmaelites, who took him to Egypt.
Pause right there. Now we have an interesting interjection here of the Midianites. And in fact, the Midianites are mentioned up in verse 36 too. So we have the Ishmaelites and the Midianites together. Anybody remember who Midian is and who the Midianites are? Make yourself a note there in your margin, chapter 25, Genesis chapter 25, verse 2. Let me just read that for you. Now, Abraham, this is after Sarah died. It said, now Abraham took another wife, whose name was Keturah, and she bore to him Zimram, and Jokshan, and Medan, and Midian. So Midian also is a son of Abraham, but not by Sarah, but by this other wife, Keturah. And we know that the Midianites became a very powerful people. In fact, Moses himself ran into Midian and the Midianites. Remember that? Was not Moses' wife a Midianite?
She was.
Remember that? Interesting here, one of these maps that I'm sure you probably memorized for the most part already is, remember last week we studied about Amalek, who was an offspring of Esau, okay? So the Amalekites lived right along here. This is kind of to the south of Beersheba, down in the Negev. Edom, who was also Esau, he was the progenitor of a group of folks. They lived down here to the south and to the east of the Arabah, which is the valley that's between the Dead Sea and the Gulf there. Anybody remember Ammon and Moab? Who were they?
Sons, grandsons of Lot.
Sons and grandsons, exactly right, of Lot. So Ammon lives over here in the area where Jordan is today. In fact, the capital of Jordan is what?
Syria.
Amman. Amman. Very similar name. And then Moab is kind of to the southeast of the Dead Sea. And there was a famous Moabite that we talk about from time to time. Who is that?
Ruth.
Ruth was a Moabite, that's right. So we see all these offspring, they have their homelands in these various places. And even Midian, okay, the Midianites wind up down here on the east side of the Gulf of Aqaba. And we know that when Moses first fled from Egypt because he killed the Egyptian soldier, he fled to the land of Midian, okay, which is right down here. So we see all these offspring, all these illegitimate offspring, if you will, become nations who, to some extent, become problems for the children of Israel.
So the moral of the story is you go against God and then it's going to cause you trouble the rest of...
History.
Right.
Yeah, that's
I'm
right.
trying to think. Infinity.
What
Today.
Yeah, what goes around comes around.
Yeah.
Yep, that's right.
We're still dealing with it.
We are still, yet to this very second, the Jews are having problems with the other offspring of Abraham. Okay.
And the
So-
rest of us too.
Yep, and the rest of us too. We sure are. You saw what was the purchase price for Joseph?
20
20
shekels.
shekels.
20 pieces of silver. Yeah. Okay, we're at verse 29, is that where
Yeah,
you are?
I'm still on it, or what?
Or Sarah can read if she wants to.
29?
When Reuben returned to the cistern and saw that Joseph was not there, he tore his clothes. He went back to his brothers and said, "The boy isn't there. Where can I turn now?" Then they got Joseph's robe, slaughtered a goat, dipped the robe in the blood. They took the ornamented robe back to their father and said, "We found this. Examine it and see whether it is your son's robe." He recognized it and said, "It is my son's robe. Some ferocious animal has devoured him. Joseph has surely been torn to pieces." When Joseph tore his clothes, put on sackcloth and mourned for his son for many days. All his sons and daughters came to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. "No," he said, "in mourning will I go down to the grave to my son." So his father wept for him. Meanwhile, the Midianites sold Joseph in Egypt, and Potiphar, one of Pharaoh's officials and captain of the guard.
Okay, so here we have the fifth burial that Jacob is involved in. And what is the fifth burial? Who does Jacob bury?
Joseph.
That's right. Okay, now we're going to talk about the significance of this, but before we do, looking at this, does this give you any insight as to the symbolism of the coat of many colors and what it represents in the New Testament?
He was betrayed by his brothers. Jesus was betrayed.
What happened in this story? What happens to the coat of many colors in the end?
Well,
When it comes back to Jacob, what condition is it in?
Bloody.
It's covered with blood. Right. So
The
What is
cistern
it?
was empty. Oh,
Jesus, that's right. I think the coat of many colors is Jesus himself. And how so? It is God. Well, let's back up. It was the Father who bestowed the coat of many colors upon his favorite son. Okay? We know that Christ, as the Son of God, has always existed. However, he came into existence in fleshly form in the New Testament time. He was born of Mary, right? I believe that the coat of many colors symbolizes the physical body of Jesus, Jesus himself, the body of Christ, if you will. And it's symbolized here that, and I think it's pretty clear, we see that in verse 12 and following, the father says to Joseph, the son, "Go check on your brothers." Did God do that with Jesus? Mm-hmm. Yeah, he said, "Go check on your brothers." And when Jesus went to check on his brothers, that is the rest of the Jews, what did they do? All the other tribes. They plotted against him, right? Some of them didn't believe him. And ultimately they devised a plot that would result in his death. And it's interesting, I think, that the Jews also made up a story about who killed Jesus. Like these brothers made up the story that said, "Oh, a wild beast must have killed him." And so what did the Jews say? Who is the wild beast that killed him? Rome. Right? Remember, Daniel spoke about Rome as being one of the beasts. So here it is. Here's the story. The Jews make up, they were certainly the brothers who were plotting against him. They made up the story that he was killed by the wild beast, Rome. But what is presented is, and what we have at the end of the story about the coat of many colors, is that the coat of many colors is torn and it's covered with blood, just the way the body of Christ was. The flesh, if you will. Christ lives on eternally. He lived before then, he lived after that, but his physical body in the form of Jesus, as Wanda said, was what was torn and bloodied at the end. So
Christ was sold.
that's right, the pieces of silver. Now, by the time of Jesus, it was 30 pieces of silver because of inflation, and it's a cash flow issue again, as Warren would say. But it was the same, he was sold for the pieces of silver. That was the ransom. So it really, I think this really tells us an interesting story about the foreshadowing of Christ and his first coming.
When Reuben went back, the well was empty. was like the tomb was empty.
Mhm.
And the
Good
people
point.
that picked him up, they had been getting all these herbs and spices, just like,
The same fragrances.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's one other note here, we talked about this before in verse 25. The Ishmaelites came along and they had their camels with them. And what do the camels represent? The work of the Holy Spirit. And it certainly was the Holy Spirit that carried Christ away and carried him on to where God wanted him to be. All right, before we leave this, before we go on to chapter 38, which is an unusual chapter, let's go to the point of the burials. What do those symbolize? And I wrote up on the top here some words that you're familiar with. We hear those words just about every time some new convert is baptized. You are buried with Christ, and you're raised to walk in newness of life. And as I studied and I thought about these burials that we have, that Jacob, who is Israel, had to participate in, there are 5 burials that are recorded. One was the burial of the idols. Remember that? He gathered up all the idols and he buried them under the tree. Second, he had to bury Deborah, who was his mother's nurse, probably like a nanny to him, probably someone that he loved very dearly, reminiscent of his childhood. Then he buried Rachel. Then he buries Isaac. And then finally, even though he doesn't know that Joseph is not dead, in his own mind he believes he is, and he actually buries his son. Okay, so what is that significant of? Is that something that's necessary for all of us? Do we all have to undergo those 5 types of burials if we're going to be truly baptized, if we are buried with Christ? And if so, what does that mean? What is the burial? Some of these are more obvious than others. But what is the burial of the idols? I mean, do we all believe that we have to bury our idols? Yeah, and what is that?
They have to get rid of the old things in order to follow God and God alone.
Exactly. Foreign gods or false gods or anything else that we regard as God other than Him, we have to bury. And if we don't do that, we're not baptized, are we? And what about Deborah? What does that symbolize?
Father, well, I'm thinking family.
Well, some particular aspect of family. I think you're on track here. How about your past and your childhood? Because I think Deborah, would have been one of those very fond memories about his childhood, about his youth. This is a woman who probably took great care of him, loved him, maybe spent more time with him even than his own mother. And so I think this relates to one's childhood or your past. Paul said there comes a time in your life you got to put away your childish ways, right? And so here we have a burial, a symbolic burial of not just the childhood, the childish ways, but also the past. Is it important? Is it necessary that we bury our past? It really is. It absolutely is. Why is that? Because there are a lot of things in our past that can bring us down, that can continue to come back and haunt us to keep us from doing what Christ would have us to do. All right, what does Rachel represent?
His flesh.
Exactly. Desire. When he saw her, he desired her. Desire of the flesh. Now, remember, Rachel is not the one that God had planned for him to marry, I believe. Because Rachel, of course, is the mother of Joseph, but Rachel is not the mother of the Messianic line, which is Judah, okay? But Rachel does very much represent the desire of his flesh.
You misspelled desire.
Take one down.
Thank you. Thank you for doing that. Because that can be very distracting to see a misspelled word out there. So please do that every time you see it. Okay, desire of the flesh. Is it necessary that we bury the desires of the flesh if we're going to be baptized, truly baptized? Absolutely. You know, you can't, as Jesus said, you cannot serve 2 masters. And that has been a theme all along. You cannot serve both the flesh and the spirit. We must always play down the desires of the flesh. Okay, Isaac. What does Isaac represent? Isaac was his physical father, which represents what?
Family.
Family again, yeah, but in a different way, right?
Yeah.
Head of the house.
Yeah, head of the house, right? Earthly leadership, I think. Okay, you buy that? Something similar to this, right? But some people, it also represents your heritage. Some people are so devoted to their own physical fathers as to leadership, as well as their heritage, that they can't be devoted to God. So you see why it's important that you must bury any other form of earthly leadership the same way that, that you get off track
It's
of
sort
here.
of a combination of the first two.
It is, it really is. Yeah. And then finally, Joseph, this is the most bizarre one, but what does that represent? What, to Jacob, what did Joseph represent? I mean, he bestowed on him his coat. What?
Jesus?
He was the manifestation of the desire of the flesh.
Yep. It was Joseph's own personal future plans apart from what God wanted, okay? God had plans for his lineage through somebody other than Joseph, but Jacob says, I'm going to vest all of my plans in this guy. So basically it is personal plans for future. So in other words, I've got my 5-year plan, I've got my 10-year plan, this is what I'm gonna do. Does that stuff have to be buried? It really does. Like the old Jewish proverb that says, men make plans and God laughs. What should our plan be? Our plan shouldn't be a 5-year or 10-year plan. Our plan should be what? To do what God tells me to do today. Today. Not next week, not a month from now, not 10 years, not a long range plan, but what God has planned for me today. So, I think here we have a complete explanation of what Paul was talking about when he says that in order to be baptized, you must be buried with Christ. And that is, you got to bury all this baggage. There's a lot of stuff that has to be buried here, including any false or improper worship. You got to bury your past, bury your childhood. Don't let that, lead you. You got to bury the desires of your flesh. You got to bury any idea that the government is going to be your salvation. Despite the politics of the day, right? The politics of the day is that the government is going to be your salvation. You shouldn't be relying on anybody but the government because they're going to bail you out of any crisis that they create. And believe me, most of the crises that we're bailed out of are ones that the government has created. Why were they created? So they could bail us out of it and we could view them as our savior. So you got to deal with that. And then again, Joseph, that's the most difficult one because our personal plans for the future, we love those the same way that Jacob loved Joseph, right? I mean, we just want to anoint our own future plans with, everything we have, we want to pour into it. And what does this tell us? No, you got to bury that. Our plans, as sweet as they may be, God has other plans, better plans for us. Yes, sir.
The only problem I have with it is burying these things is desire, flesh, leadership, past. They won't come back.
Oh, yes.
They resurrect them.
Yes. Just like those zombies. That's what those zombie movies are about these days. All these things want to come back.
Buried, I know we can't destroy them.
That's right.
Buried them is like hiding them, or we know where they are, but
Yeah.
we still have problems with them.
Yeah, we got to bury them and let them go. But Kenny, you're exactly right. They keep coming back. They keep rearing their ugly zombie heads, and they want to grab us. Okay. Now, chapter 38. Chapter 38 is one of those chapters like, what was that last one we had about Dinah, chapter 34. You wonder why is chapter 34 and 38 even in here? I chuckled this week as I was prepared. I was thinking about, all of the people who, all the ladies and some of the men in the past who taught us children's Sunday school classes. and Vacation Bible School, and all you ladies and you guys who've done it too, they taught us Old Testament stories. And even going back to the Garden of Eden, when they taught us about the Garden of Eden, we'd always have these things that we'd color, these cutouts that we made. In the Garden of Eden, when you learn the story about Adam and Eve, what are some of the visual images that they made for us?
Fig leaves.
They had fig leaves, that's right. And they had snakes, right? And they had apples, okay, so we colored the apples and we learned the story of Adam and Eve. Trees, that's right. And then how about the story of Noah? Sunday school teachers taught us.
A lot of animals.
Big old boat, animals 2 by 2, maybe the people going in, rainbow, right? Okay. And then, what's that?
Dove.
And the dove, that's right. We have all sorts of visual images there. And then you think about even going forward, we got a little earlier, we learned about Abraham taking Isaac up on the mountain, right? And so we have the knife, and we have the ram who's caught, and we have the altar there, and we remember all that. Now, so I thought that, I said, I never had a Sunday school lesson about chapter 34, and I didn't about 38 either, and you probably didn't either. And I'm thinking, boy, what if some Sunday school teacher had to teach that? I said, what sort of things would they make visual images of? And I thought, oh my goodness, what would they be coloring red? And I laughed out loud. But, and you will too when you start thinking about it. Think about, if I had to do visual images about the rape of Dinah or about what we have in chapter 38, oh my goodness, what would I put together? Some lessons are not meant for children under 13.
Chapter 38 is X-rated, okay?
Yeah, it really is. It really is. And you think, why in the world do we have this? There's a couple reasons, in my opinion, why we have sections like chapter 34 and then chapter 38. And one of them is that this, to me, is evidence that all of this was inspired by the Holy Spirit. And why do I say that? I say that because if some man had written this, or a woman, some human being had written this for the purpose of the aggrandizement of the Jewish nation, they would have left these chapters out. Because what does this show other than the ugly underbelly of what's going on within the nation of Israel? Chapter 34 was horrible, what was happening. There's nothing commendable about anything that was done in chapter 34, and chapter 38 is about the same. But the thing that magnifies it and multiplies it is that, this guy Judah, he is one of the forefathers of Jesus Christ himself. And he comes out to be just a scoundrel and a scallywag. So why do we have this? I don't know what else. That's one of the most polite words I could use, I guess.
Isn't he kind of a later parallel to David and Bathsheba, I think? Kind of a parallel there.
Well, it also gives a difference between Judah's character and Joseph's character.
Yeah. It really does. I mean, it is a stunning contrast between the character of Joseph and Judah. And you think, then why in the world was Judah selected to be a forefather of Christ and not Joseph? Why is Joseph not in that line?
Because I think Joseph, as you just mentioned, was more of a personal, fleshly plan, and Judah was more of a spiritual plan. Though Judah does mess up, but so did David.
Yeah. Well, and then several of you have said it, that one of these things shows us that the plan of God for salvation even includes scoundrels and scallywags, right? Even the worst of them.
Praise God and thank Him He does.
Amen to that one. But
Otherwise, we wouldn't have a prayer.
That's right.
Yeah, you're right, because there are degrees of scoundrels and scallywags, but we are all scoundrels and scallywags to one degree or another, Okay. Do we have time to read about this, or are we going to save it till later? Let's get started. Who's our next reader, Terry?
At that time, Judah left his brothers and went down to stay with a man of Abdullam, his name Hira. There Judah met the daughter of a Canaanite man named Shua. He married her and lay with her. She became pregnant and gave birth to a son, who was named She conceived again and gave birth to a son named Onan. She gave birth to still another son and named him Shelah. It was at Kezeb that she gave birth to him. Judah got a wife for his firstborn, and her name was Tamar.
Okay, pause right there. So Judah, again, a son of Jacob and a forefather of Christ. We see that he goes into the land of Canaan. He takes as a wife, evidently a Canaanite woman. She bears to him 3 sons. And so then he goes to find another woman who's going to be the wife of his son and her name is Tamar, or Tamar. Okay, read on from there. Go ahead, Terry.
But Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the Lord's sight. So the Lord put him to death.
Pause right there. Now you think, okay, Judah, he is the standard bearer, if you will. His first son should have been the one who would carry on the lineage, right? But what happened? He did evil in the sight of God, so what happened?
He died.
God took him out. We don't know exactly what form of evil it was, but no doubt it had something to do with the Canaanite culture, the worship of the gods of the Canaanites. Okay, read on.
Then Judah said to Onan, lie with your brother's wife and fulfill your duty to her as a brother-in-law to produce offspring for your brother. But Onan knew that the offspring would not be his, so whenever he lay with his brother's wife, he spilled his semen on the ground to keep from producing offspring for his brother. What he did was wicked in the Lord's sight, so it put him to death also.
Okay, so that's 2 up and 2 down. Okay, so the first 2 sons of Judah are killed, and the third one is kind of in the background. Okay, verse 11. Nancy, you want to pick up there?
Then Judah said to his daughter-in-law Tamar, remain a widow in your father's house until my son Shelah grows up, for he feared that he too would die like his brothers. So Tamar went to live in her father's house. In course of time the wife of Judah, Shua's daughter, died. When Judah's time of mourning was over, he went up to Timnah to his sheep shearers, he and his friend Hira the Adullamite. When Tamar was told, your father-in-law is going up to Timnah to shear his sheep, she put off her widow's garments, put on a veil, wrapped herself up, and sat down at the entrance to Enaim, which is on the road to Timnah. She saw that Shelah was grown up, yet she had not been given to him in marriage.
Pause right there. So she's feeling a little bit insecure at that point in time, right? She's thinking, all right, I married this guy, God killed him, then God killed the guy who's supposed to step up to be my husband after he died, his brother. Now, the third one's come along, he's of marriageable age, and nobody has offered him up, so, I'm basically in pretty bad shape here. Now, what we read next is, there's some pretty shameful stuff here. So let's discern if we can see anything at all positive. I certainly can't see anything positive in what Judah does. See if there's anything positive in what Tamar does. Read on, Nancy.
When Judah saw her, he thought her to be a prostitute, for she had covered her face. He went over to her at the roadside and said, come, let me come into you, for he did not know that she was his daughter-in-law. She said, what will you give me, that you may come into me?
Pause right here. So Judah sees this woman, he perceives her to be a prostitute. Now what should he have done? Should have gone the other direction. What does he really do? He starts bargaining a price. I don't see anything too positive about that. But anyway, read on.
He answered, I will send you a kid from the flock. And she said, only if you give me a pledge until you send it. He said, what pledge shall I give you? She replied, your signet and your cord and the staff that is in your hand. So he gave them to her and went into her, and she conceived by him.
Pause right there just a second. Okay. Symbolically, there may be something positive here because so Judah perceives that he's encountered a prostitute. They're negotiating the price. He says, all right, I'll give you a goat. And she says, all right, I guess the goat's okay, but you don't have the goat with you, so you need to give me some security, right? And that's what a pledge is. Give me some security that you're going to deliver the goat. This is pretty sordid stuff. But one of the things she winds up with is what?
Identification.
The signet, but also the staff.
Yeah.
Because it is said of Judah, when Jacob, in the end, we'll read this later on, when Jacob blesses Judah, he says, the rod or the staff will not depart from your family until Shiloh comes. So the staff was a symbol of the coming Christ. And so if we make out anything positive here about Tamar, it is that she saw that Judah, or it was revealed to her that Judah was of the line, and so she had a desire to hold on to the staff, the lineage of Christ. Okay? So read on.
Then she got up and went away, and taking off her veil, she put on the garments of her widowhood. When Judah sent the kid by his friend the Adullamite to recover the pledge from the woman, he could not find her. He asked the townspeople, "Where is the temple prostitute who was at Enaim by the wayside?" But they said, "No prostitute has been here."
All right, can you pick up in verse 22, please?
So he went back to Judah and said, I didn't find her, besides the men who lived there said, there hasn't been any shrine prostitute here. Then Judah said, let her keep what she has, or we will become a laughing stock. After all, I did not send her this young goat, but you didn't find her. I did send her this young goat, but you didn't find her. About 3 months later, Judah was told, your daughter-in-law, Tamar, is guilty of prostitution, and as a result, she is now pregnant. Judah said, bring her out and have her burned to death.
Pause right there. And you think, you gotta be kidding. You gotta be kidding. Here's old Judah, who's taken up with a prostitute, but he finds that his daughter-in-law is pregnant because of harlotry, and what does it say?
Burner.
Burn her. Burn her. Far be it from me, but burn her, okay?
But wait, he didn't value his birthright if he gave that staff away.
Yeah, that's true.
So,
That's true. But read on. Read on, Kenny.
Okay. As she was being brought out, she sent a message to her father-in-law. I am pregnant by the man who owns these, she said. And she added, see if you recognize whose seal and cord and staff these are. Judah recognized them and said, she is more righteous than I, since I wouldn't give her to my son Shelah. And he did not sleep with her again. When the time came for her to give birth.
Wait, pause right there just a second. All right, so what do we have here is the making of a cover-up, right? So, Judah has basically been found out, all right? So it would be revealed that he is the father of the child that his daughter-in-law is bearing and is so by illegitimate means. But to her credit, Tamar keeps it secret. She doesn't say, at her burning ceremony, she doesn't say, aha, see what I have right here. He's the evil one, burn him, not me. She says, no, secretly she sends it back. And what does Judah say? She is more righteous than I am. And her righteousness is recognized as what? Having held on, I think, to the staff, to the scepter. So, and then we see this other peculiar story. Wanda, read that for us, if you would, in verse 27. This is about Tamar giving birth.
When the time came for her to give birth, there were twin boys in her womb. As she was giving birth, one of them pulled out his hand, so the midwife took a scarlet thread, tied it on his wrist, and said, this one came out first. But when he drew back his hand, his brother came out, and she said, so this is how you have broken out. And he was named Perez. Then his brother, who had the scarlet thread on his wrist, came out, and he was given the name Zerah.
So here we have another circumstance of twins, just like who? Jacob and Esau wrestled in their mother's womb. One came out grabbing the heel of the other. Here we have a strange story that one sticks out his hand and a scarlet thread is tied around it, and then the other one comes out. One represents the child of the Spirit, I'll submit to you, because Perez is the one who is in the lineage of Christ, but the other is not. One represents the flesh, one represents the Spirit, and there's a mix-up in the order of things, but again, I'll submit to you that the order of things is that the flesh comes first, just like the boy who stuck his hand out first, but it is the Spirit that must be dominant, Perez. But here's one thing, if you don't remember anything else about chapter 38, I want you to turn to Matthew chapter 1, verse 3. Matthew chapter 1, verse 3. And since we're running short on time, this is the genealogy of Christ as reported by Matthew. And he starts off, he talks about the genealogy of Jesus, the son of David, the son of Abraham. And he says, to Abraham was born Isaac, to Isaac Jacob, to Jacob Judah and his brothers, and to Judah were born Perez and Zerah by
Tamar.
Tamar. There's old Tamar. Bless her little heart. And if you read through here, you're going to see that there are only a few women. Who are the women who are mentioned in the line of Christ?
Tamar,
Tamar.
Rahab,
Rahab, Ruth the Moabitess,
Bathsheba.
and Bathsheba. That's right. And the only other one is Mary. Okay. So Tamar was a Gentile. Rahab was a Gentile. Ruth was a Gentile. Bathsheba, we don't know about her. She may have been a Jew, but she was the wife of Uriah the Hittite, right? So she may have been a Canaanite. And then Mary. Okay, Mary was definitely a Jew. She was a purebred Jew. But interestingly, the clear majority of the women who are mentioned in the line of Christ are Gentiles. And why do we say that? Why is that good news for us?
It's our foot in the door.
Just like the scoundrels and the scallywags, right? None of us are Jews, but we're included in the line because Christ wanted us to be included. Okay. Next time we're going to get back to Joseph and the rest of his carryings on in Egypt.